At 68 years old, I sold the company I built from nothing for $58 million. To celebrate, I took my only son and his wife to the fanciest restaurant in the city. He smiled. He toasted my success. And then, when he thought I wasn't looking, he tried to kill me. What my son didn't know is that someone else was watching, and that one quiet warning would set in motion a plan to dismantle his entire world piece by piece. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that a legacy is something you build, not just something you inherit. The restaurant was the kind of place where the silence had weight. It was broken only by the gentle clinking of silver on porcelain and the low murmur of conversations from people who never had to raise their voices to be heard. Across the starched white tablecloth, my son Kevin and his wife Brenda were performing. Their smiles were too bright, their praise too polished. They looked at me with an awe that felt rehearsed, like a scene they had practiced in the car on the way over. $58 million, Dad, Kevin said, shaking his head as if in disbelief. The crystal wine glass looked fragile in his hand. Can you even wrap your head around that number? It's incredible. A true testament to your entire life. I simply nodded, taking a slow sip of my cranberry juice. I could feel the lie behind his words. It had a familiar taste, bitter and sharp. For 40 years, I had poured my life into Callahan Logistics, starting with a single-use truck and a conviction that I could do it better than anyone else. I remembered the sleepless nights, the grease under my fingernails, the constant worry that gnawed at my stomach. I built that company on sweat and integrity, two things Kevin had never understood. He saw the $58 million, but he had never seen the sacrifice. Brenda reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her skin was cold, her touch fleeting. "We are just so proud of you, Jack." "Really? Now you can finally relax. Enjoy the fruits of your labor. Let us take care of you." The phrase hung in the air. Let us take care of you. It sounded less like an offer and more like a proposal. I looked at my son, searching for the boy I remembered. The one who used to ride shotgun in my first truck, his small hand clutching a toy car. But that boy was gone. In his place was a man whose eyes held the cold, hard gleam of entitlement. My late wife, Alicia, had seen it years ago. I remember her standing by the window after one of Kevin's many requests for money, a quiet sadness in her eyes. "Be careful, Jack," she had told me. "He sees you as a bank, not a father." At the time, I thought she was being too harsh. Now, sitting in this temple of wealth, her words echoed in my mind like a prophecy. The conversation drifted a shallow river of meaningless pleasantries. They asked about my health, but didn't wait for the answer. They talked about their plans, a trip to Europe, a new car, all spoken with the casual assumption that their financial worries were now a thing of the past. They were spending my money before it had even settled in my account. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the dull throb of disappointment that had become my constant companion whenever I was around my son. I had hoped this night would be different, that the magnitude of this achievement might finally earn me a sliver of genuine respect. But I was wrong. I was not a father celebrating with his family. I was a vault waiting to be opened. After the main course was cleared, Kevin stood up, his smile widening. "Brenda, my love," he said, extending a hand. "They're playing our song. Will you dance with me?" It was a classic, a slow ballad from a bygone era. Another performance, another gesture designed to show me what a happy, loving couple they were. Brenda accepted with a demure nod, and they made their way to the small dance floor near the grand piano. I watched them move together, their bodies swaying in perfect rhythm. From a distance, they were the picture of happiness. But I knew the truth. I I had paid off Kevin's gambling debts 3 times. I had co-signed the mortgage on their oversized house. Their picture-perfect life was a fragile illusion held together by my money. I turned my attention back to my drink, just cranberry juice. My doctor had been firm after my last checkup. "Your heart is strong, Jack, but it's not invincible. No more whiskey. From now on, you're a cranberry juice man." It was a small sacrifice for a longer life. I swirled the deep red liquid in my glass, watching the ice cubes clink against the sides. A life I intended to enjoy. That's when I noticed him. A man in a sharp security guard uniform was approaching my table. He was older, maybe in his early 60s, with a posture as straight as a steel rod and eyes that missed nothing. He moved with a quiet purpose, his gaze fixed on me. He stopped beside my chair, leaning in slightly, as if to share a secret. "Mr. Callahan," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. It was calm, but laced with an undeniable urgency. "I don't mean to alarm you, sir." He paused, his eyes flicking towards the dance floor, and then back to me. "But I was standing near the bar. I saw your son. When he was coming back to the table a few minutes ago, he thought no one was watching. I saw him pour something from a small vial into your juice." The world stopped. The music from the piano faded. The clinking of glasses disappeared. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. I stared at the man whose name tag read Marcus. His face was a mask of professional concern, but in his eyes I saw genuine worry. He was telling the truth. I didn't gasp. I didn't shout. Years of negotiating tough contracts and dealing with crises had taught me to control my reactions. A cold wave washed over me, so chilling it felt like ice water in my veins. I looked down at the glass in my hand. The deep red liquid, once a symbol of my healthy choices, now looked like a cup of poison. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to throw it against the wall, to confront my son, to cause a scene. But I did none of those things. I simply looked at Marcus, and a silent understanding passed between us. I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the confirmation he needed. He straightened up, gave a slight touch to the brim of his cap, and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows of the restaurant. My mind raced, connecting dots I had refused to see for years. Kevin's impatience, his constant questions about my will, his frustration when I told him I planned to live another 20 years. It wasn't just greed. It was something far darker. He didn't just want my money. He wanted me gone. The boy I had raised, the child I had loved, had just tried to murder me for his inheritance. The thought was so monstrous, so unnatural, that for a second my breath caught in my throat. But the cold, hard logic was undeniable. The 58 million had not been a celebration. It had been a death sentence. Just then, the song ended. I saw Kevin and Brenda making their way back to the table, their faces flushed with laughter. They looked so normal, so happy. My own son walking towards me with a smile minutes after trying to poison me. The coldness inside me solidified into something else, something hard and sharp. It was resolve. As they sat down, I put on the performance of my life. I clutched my stomach, letting out a soft groan. "Brenda, your father is a terrible actor." Kevin laughed. I shook my head, forcing a pained expression onto my face. "No, it's not that." I rasped, my voice deliberately weak. My stomach, it just seized up on me. An old problem. "I think I need to get home." Brenda's face filled with a theatrical display of concern. "Oh my goodness, Jack, do you need a doctor? Let us drive you home." No, I said, waving my hand dismissively. This was the critical part. I couldn't let them near me. "It'll pass. I just need to lie down. I've already called an Uber. It's waiting outside." Kevin stood up, helping me out of my chair. His hand on my arm felt like a brand. "Are you sure, Dad? We don't mind." "I'm sure," I said firmly. I steadied myself against the table. and in that moment, my hand brushed against the tall glass of cranberry juice. With a motion that looked entirely accidental, I knocked it over. The red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth like a pool of blood. "Oh, clumsy me," I muttered, while they were distracted, calling for a waiter. I grabbed the thick cloth napkin that had absorbed most of the spill. It was heavy and damp in my hand. Under the guise of wiping my trousers, I quickly folded it and shoved it deep into my coat pocket. It was my only evidence, my only proof of the terrible truth. I didn't wait for them to say another word. I turned and walked away, moving as quickly as my shaking legs would allow. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the look of satisfaction I knew would be creeping onto their faces. 15 minutes later, I was in the back of a silent car. The city lights blurring into streaks of color through the window. My hand was still in my pocket, clutching the damp napkin. The sweet, cloying smell of cranberry filled the air. I didn't feel anger yet, or even sadness. That would come later. Right now, all I felt was a profound, chilling clarity. The trap had been set for me tonight. But as I held the proof in my hand, I knew they were the ones who were already caught. This was not the end. It was the beginning. The Uber dropped me off a few blocks from my house, disappearing into the river of late-night traffic. I stood for a moment under the orange glow of a street light, the damp folded napkin, a heavy weight in my coat pocket. My home was just down the street, its warm lights, a familiar beacon in the darkness. But I couldn't go there. Not yet. Home was a place of memories filled with the ghosts of a life I now realized was a carefully constructed lie. The photos on the mantelpiece, the family vacations, the birthdays, all of it felt tainted like a beautiful painting now covered in a thin film of poison. To go home now would be to admit defeat, to let the grief and the shock overwhelm me. I couldn't afford that. Grief was a luxury. What I needed was certainty. I walked against the flow of the city, away from the quiet residential streets, and towards the harsh, impersonal lights of the downtown core. The night was alive with a different kind of energy here. Sirens wailed in the distance. The hum of the city was a constant, emotionless drone. It suited my mood perfectly. I needed sterility. I needed facts. I needed a place where truth was measured in parts per million, not in shades of love and betrayal. I knew a place, a private diagnostic lab, tucked away in a medical building, one that advertised 24/7 service for wealthy clients who valued speed and discretion. Callahan Logistics used to have a contract with them for employee drug testing. I walked through the automatic glass doors into a lobby that was silent and cold. The air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. A young man sat behind a thick pane of glass, his face illuminated by the glow of a computer monitor. He looked up, his expression neutral. I pulled the damp napkin from my pocket. It was sealed inside a plastic bag I'd taken from a street-side trash can. I placed it on the counter in the transaction drawer. "I need a full toxicology screening on this," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I need to know everything it contains, organic and inorganic. I need it done tonight. Money is not an issue." The technician, whose name tag read Ben, simply nodded. He slid the drawer back, examined the sample with professional detachment, and began typing at his computer. "A priority 1 toxicology panel will be expensive, sir. Just do it," I said, pulling out my credit card. He ran the card, slid a form towards me, and pointed to a line at the bottom. "I'll need a contact number email to send the encrypted results when they're ready. Should be about 3 to 4 hours." I wrote down my private email address, pushed the form back, and turned to leave. There was a small, sterile waiting area, but I couldn't sit there. I couldn't be still. I needed to keep moving. I found a small all-night diner a block away, the kind of place that felt unstuck in time. I ordered a black coffee I had no intention of drinking and sat in a booth by the window, watching the city's nocturnal life unfold. My mind started to work, processing the situation with the same methodical logic I used to build my business. My first instinct, the instinct of any citizen, was to call the police to report the crime, but I immediately dismissed the thought. A police report would create a public record. The story would leak to the press. I could see the headlines now. Logistics mogul Jack Callahan poisoned by his own son. My name, my company's name, my legacy, all of it would be forever tied to this single sordid act of betrayal. Alicia's memory would be dragged through the mud. It would become a public spectacle, a feast for tabloids and gossip columnists. No, this wasn't a crime that could be healed by a public trial and a prison sentence. This was a deep, malignant cancer within my own family. It required not a policeman's handcuffs, but a surgeon's scalpel, a private, precise, and radical excision. I thought back, searching for the signs I must have missed. I saw Kevin as a boy, a child who could lie with a placid, innocent face. I remembered him blaming the neighbor's kid for a window. He had broken a lie he held on to. Even when confronted with the truth, I remembered his teenage years, the string of borrowed and unreturned items, the casual disregard for other people's property or feelings. I had called it carelessness, immaturity. I had made excuses for him, telling myself he would grow out of it. Alicia had known better. She had tried to warn me. I had been a fool, a loving hopeful, but ultimately blind fool. The most chilling thought was the vial. Marcus, the security guard, had been specific, a small vial. That meant this wasn't an impulsive act of anger. This was premeditated. My son, my only child, had researched my health conditions. He had acquired a specific substance. He had carried that vial to the restaurant with a clear and singular purpose. He had waited for the right moment, a moment of distraction, to turn a celebratory dinner into an execution. He had smiled at me, toasted my health, all while knowing he had just delivered my death sentence into my glass. The sheer coldness of it, the absolute lack of a soul, was what truly terrified me. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an email. The subject line was a sterile string of numbers, a case file ID. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath, opened the encrypted file, and began to read. The document was filled with chemical names and technical jargon, but there was a summary at the top written in plain English for the client. My eyes scanned the words. Substance detected: metoprolol tartrate. Concentration 2500 mg per 100 mols. I didn't know the name, but I kept reading. The technician had added a clinical note. Metoprolol is a beta blocker commonly prescribed for cardiovascular conditions. The standard therapeutic dosage is typically 25 to 100 mg. The detected concentration is exponentially higher for an individual with a pre-existing cardiac condition. Ingestion of this dosage would almost certainly induce acute myocardial infarction within 1 to 2 hours, the symptoms of which would be virtually indistinguishable from a naturally occurring fatal heart attack. A heart attack. That's how it would have looked. The grieving son, the tragic, but not entirely unexpected death of an aging businessman. It was the perfect murder. I closed the phone. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. A tiny, desperate part of me had been clinging to the hope that it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding, a terrible, elaborate prank. But that hope was gone now, obliterated by the cold, hard science on the screen. The document was a death certificate that had thankfully not been needed. I looked out the diner window. The first hints of dawn were beginning to soften the edges of the city. A new day was beginning. I felt no anger, no rage. Those emotions were too hot, too chaotic. What I felt was a profound, icy calm. The kind of calm that comes when all uncertainty is stripped away and only the brutal, unavoidable truth remains. My son had tried to kill me, and now I knew exactly what I had to do. The time for grieving the son I had lost was over. It was time to deal with the monster he had become. I picked up my phone again, but I didn't dial 911. I dialed the private number of my lawyer, Cynthia Walsh. It was time to assemble my army. I left the diner and walked. The sky was turning from the deep inky black of night to a bruised purple. The first sign of a dawn I felt completely disconnected from. The city was still mostly asleep, but my mind was wide awake, buzzing with a cold electric energy. Every step on the pavement was deliberate. Every breath was measured. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding resolve. I knew who I had to call. There was only one person I trusted to navigate the storm that was coming. I stopped on a quiet corner and dialed her private number from memory. It rang twice. A voice clear and sharp, even at this ungodly hour, answered. "Walsh!" "Cynthia, it's Jack. I need to see you now." There was no hesitation, no sleepy confusion in her voice, just immediate acceptance. "My office, 30 minutes." The line went dead. Her office was on the 40th floor of a glass and steel tower that overlooked the entire city. When I arrived, the building was silent, the main lobby empty except for a lone security guard. But the private elevator to her floor worked with my key card, just as she'd said it would. The doors opened not into a reception area, but directly into her personal office. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the slowly brightening skyline, a half-empty mug of coffee in her hand. Cynthia Walsh was in her late 40s, with her father's steady gaze and a mind that moved faster than anyone I'd ever known. Her father, David, had been my best friend, my partner in the early impossible days of the company. I had known Cynthia since she was a little girl with pigtails and a fierce love for argument. I watched her grow up, watched her pass the bar with top honors, and when David passed away, she took over his role as my legal counsel, my confidant, and the closest thing I had to a daughter. She was family forged in decades of shared history and absolute trust. "Jack," she said, turning from the window. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned my face. "You look like you've been through a war." "The war is just beginning," I replied. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I sat down in one of the leather chairs opposite her large mahogany desk, and I told her everything. I started with the dinner at the restaurant. The stilted conversation, the fake smiles. I recounted the security guard's words, a story that felt no less insane, telling it the second time. Then, I slid my phone across the polished surface of the desk, the lab report still open on the screen. She picked it up, her expression hardening as she read the clinical brutal words. She placed the phone down gently, her knuckles white. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw not just the outrage of a lawyer, but the personal fury of a loved one. "That son of all," she whispered the words, a low, dangerous hiss. "He finally did it. He finally crossed the line." She stood up and began to pace a coiled spring of energy. "All right. First call is to the district attorney. I'll wake him up myself. We'll have a warrant for Kevin's arrest before the sun is fully up. Attempted murder premeditated. With this lab report and the guard's testimony, it's an open and shut case." I held up a hand. "No." She stopped pacing and stared at me. "No, Jack. He tried to kill you. And what happens then?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. Headlines. A public trial. The Callahan name dragged through the mud for months, maybe years. Everything I built, everything Alicia, and I stood for reduced to a sordid true crime story. My legacy becomes my son, the murderer. Is that a victory, Cynthia? She was silent for a long moment, studying my face. She understood. This wasn't about what was legal. This was about what was right. "So, what do you want?" she asked, her voice softening. This isn't about punishment. It's about a correction, a permanent, irreversible adjustment of reality. Prison is too easy. It's an ending he doesn't deserve. I want to take away the one thing he was willing to kill for. I want to take away the money, all of it. I want him to wake up one day and realize that his entire world, the world he was so sure he was about to inherit, has vanished. A slow, dangerous smile touched Cynthia's lips. It was the same smile her father used to get when he was about to outmaneuver a competitor. "I see," she said. "This isn't a criminal case. This is a demolition. All right, Jack. If we're going to do this, we do it my way. We need more than this lab report. We need a complete picture. We need to know everything about them. Every dollar they owe, every friend they have, every secret they're keeping. We need to map out their entire life so we can find the precise points to apply pressure." She walked over to her laptop, her movements now filled with a fierce purpose. "I know a firm, ex-FBI and former IRS agents. They're discreet as ghosts, and they live for this kind of work. They can find out what brand of toothpaste Brenda uses from 3 states away. I'll have a team on them by sunrise. They will dig into every corner of Kevin and Brenda's lives. We'll have a full financial and personal workup within a week." I nodded. "Good. While they're digging, I'll play my part." Cynthia raised an eyebrow. "Which is the part they expect me to play?" I explained. "The grieving father? The oblivious old man. They need to believe their plan almost worked, that I had a minor health scare and nothing more. For them to get careless, they need to feel safe. They need to believe the prize is still within their grasp." I told her about the phone call I was anticipating from Kevin and the idea I had already planted in his head. I mentioned I was setting up a large family trust. "I'm gonna let them think that's still my main focus. I'll dangle the inheritance right in front of them." Cynthia's smile widened. "Let their greed make them stupid. It's a classic strategy for a reason. It always works." She looked over at a framed photo on her bookshelf. It was of her, a grinning teenager standing between me and her father on a fishing boat. "My dad always said you were a better poker player than he was," she said softly. "He told me you always knew when to hold, when to fold, and when to go Allen." I looked at the photo, a pang of loss hitting me. David would have known what to do. He also said, "You were smarter than both of us combined." He was right. I remember when I was about 10, Cynthia recalled, her eyes distant for a second. "You and my dad were in our living room spreading the blueprints for the first big warehouse across the floor. You were so excited. And I remember seeing Kevin. He must have been around 12, sitting in the corner of the room. He wasn't paying attention. He was just methodically breaking the arms off one of his action figures one by one because he was bored. We let that memory hang in the air. A small dark omen from the past. A warning we had all failed to heed. "All right," Cynthia said, her voice snapping back to the present. "The plan is set. Phase 1 is intelligence gathering. Phase 2 is the trap. You keep them calm and distracted. Let me handle the rest." As she turned back to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard, I walked to the window. The sun was now a brilliant orange line on the horizon. The city below was waking up, a million lights beginning to dim as the daylight took over. I felt no joy, no satisfaction, only the grim heavy weight of purpose. My son had started a war when he poured that poison into my glass. But here in this office, 40 floors above the sleeping world, his father and his god-sister were building the machine of his defeat. Oh, the sun was rising on the first day of the rest of his life, and he had no idea it was already over. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as I was sitting in my study with a cup of black coffee, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Kevin's name. I let it ring 4 times. a deliberate hesitation to mask the fact that I had been expecting this call with absolute certainty. Finally, I picked up, composing my voice to sound a little tired, a little frail. "Hello," I said, my voice just a touch weaker than usual. "Dad, oh, thank God you answered." Kevin's voice on the other end was a symphony of manufactured concern. It was a masterful performance, I had to admit. He sounded breathless, frantic. I was so worried. "Brenda and we didn't sleep a wink last night. We kept calling, but it just went to voicemail." "Are you okay? What happened? Did you go to the hospital?" I could hear the rapid-fire questions for what they were, not an inquiry into my well-being, but a desperate search for information. He needed to know if his plan had failed, or if it had been discovered. He was probing for any hint of suspicion. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather creaking softly, and prepared to give him the answer he so desperately wanted to hear. "Easy, son. I'm all right," I said with a soft chuckle as if dismissing his worry. "Just a bit of a scare, that's all. I saw my doctor this morning." I paused, letting him hang on the words. "He said it was nothing more than a bad case of indigestion. All that rich food, the sauces. My stomach isn't what it used to be. The doctor said it can sometimes feel like the real thing. A lot of pressure in the chest. But he ran some tests. My heart is just fine." I could almost feel the wave of relief coming through the phone. A quiet exhale. The tension in his voice immediately slackened. He wasn't listening to my words. He was listening for the absence of suspicion, and he had found it. The story was plausible. It was simple. It made him innocent. "Indigestion. Are you sure that's all it was?" He pressed one last check to be certain. "You left in such a hurry. You looked so pale." "The doctor is sure, and so am I said, letting a note of finality into my tone. "My body's not the well-oiled machine it once was, Kevin. I guess that's just something I have to get used to." I sighed a long, weary sound I had practiced in my head. It was a sigh designed to sound like a man contemplating his own mortality. A man who would soon be thinking about his legacy. This was the moment, the perfect opening. "You know, son," I began, my voice softer now, more reflective. "That little episode last night, it really got me thinking. You get to my age and you realize that time isn't a guarantee. We need to make sure things are in order." "What do you mean, Dad?" He asked, a new edge to his voice. The fake worry was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused curiosity. I let a few seconds of silence pass as if I was gathering my thoughts. "I've been on the phone with Cynthia Walsh this morning," I said, dropping her name deliberately. The mention of my lawyer would give my next words the weight of legal authority. "We've been discussing my estate, that sale, the 58 million. It changes things. It complicates things." "Right. Yeah, of course," Kevin said quickly, his voice now dripping with anticipation. "And I've decided," I said, delivering the bait with perfect casual precision, "that the best way to handle it is to set up a significant family trust, a very large one. I want to make sure that you and Brenda are taken care of properly. I want to ensure that this money is a blessing for our family for generations to come, not a burden." Cynthia is drawing up the papers as we speak. Silence. For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the gears turning in his head. I could almost feel the greed overwhelming every other thought, every other fear, the failed murder attempt, the close call, the lingering anxiety had all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the dazzling, beautiful promise of a legally binding ironclad fortune. A trust. He finally stammered, his voice thick with barely concealed excitement. "Dade, that's incredible. You don't have to do that. We're fine." His protest was so weak, so transparent, it was almost laughable. It was the polite refusal of a man who had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. And there it was. The hook was set. The line went taut. The fish had taken the bait, the lure, the sinker, everything. Nonsense, I said warmly, playing the part of the benevolent patriarch. You're my only son. Who else would I do this for? This is my legacy, securing your future. That's all that matters to me now. I don't know what to say, he said. And for the first time, I believe he was telling the truth. His mind was so full of dollar signs that he couldn't form a coherent thought. He was already spending the money. He was already living in the future he had been willing to kill for a future he now believed was being handed to him on a silver platter. Don't say anything, I said, my voice gentle. Just stay close. Cynthia will need you and Brenda to come in and sign some preliminary documents in a week or so. We'll talk more then. For now, I need to rest. This old man is more tired than he thought. Of course, Dad, you rest, and thank you. Really, thank you. I hung up the phone and placed it softly on the desk. The silence of the study was absolute. Prison, your lives as you know them will be over. I let them picture it. The handcuffs, the trial, the cell. Or, I continued, there is option 2. Cynthia slid a single thick document across the table, followed by a pen. You sign this. It is a legally binding and irrevocable agreement. In it, you will relinquish any and all future claims to my estate or the estate of your mother. You will sign over the deed to your house, the mortgages for which have been paid in full by a holding company and the title now controlled by the foundation, to the Ishers Alesia Callahan Foundation. You will pack a single suitcase each, and you will walk out of this office and out of my life as forever. You will never contact me or anyone associated with me ever again. On return, I finished. I will not press charges. This evidence, I said, gesturing to the pile on the table, will be placed in a secure vault held in escrow by this firm. If you ever violate the terms of this agreement in any way, it will be delivered to the authorities immediately. You will have your freedoms, but you will have nothing else. You will start over from zero with nothing but the clothes on your backs. I leaned back in my chair. Cynthia and I said nothing more. The choice was theirs, ruin or prison, erasure or extinction. The pen sat on the table between them waiting. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The choice was between a life in ruins and no life at all. I watched as my son's hand, trembling slightly, reached for the pen. He didn't read the document. He just signed his name on the line Cynthia indicated. His signature, once so confident, was now the barely legible scroll of a defeated man. He pushed the papers over to Brenda. Her tears fell silently onto the page, smudging the ink as she added her own name to the surrender. They stood up, their movements slow and robotic. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. They walked out of the conference room, leaving behind their greed, their ambition, and their entire future. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, and in the silence that followed, I felt not victory, but the profound, quiet-ass sorrow of a necessary end, a exit. That was 3 months ago. The seasons have changed. I am not in my large, quiet house. I am standing in a small, bright art gallery downtown. The air smells of fresh paint and possibility. The walls are covered in bold, vibrant canvases, the work of young artists who are seeing their dreams realized for the first time. This is the R's inaugural exhibition funded by the Alesia Callahan Foundation. A young woman with paint stains on her hands and a fire in her eyes is standing beside me explaining her piece. It's a chaotic, beautiful burst of color that reminds me so much of my wife. I am listening to her, really listening, and I am smiling. It's a genuine smile, one that reaches my eyes. It feels unfamiliar but welcome. I used to think a legacy was something you passed down, a torch of wealth and assets handed from one generation to the next. I spent my whole life building something to give to my son, I see now that I was wrong. A true legacy isn't what you leave to your family. It's what you leave in your community. It's the opportunities you create, the good you put out into the world that will continue to grow long after your name is forgotten. By taking away a fortune my son hadn't earned, I gave him the only thing my money could never buy him: the chance to build a life of his own. A life that has to be built on work and character, not on an inheritance. Whether he takes that chance is his choice, not mine. His story is his own now. But more importantly, we took the dark, ugly thing that his greed had created, and we transformed it. We turned a son's betrayal into an artist's first exhibition. We turned poison into paint. We turned a potential inheritance into an actual opportunity for hundreds of people I will never meet. In doing so, I am honoring my wife in a way that selling her collection never could have. I am keeping her spirit alive, not by preserving it in a silent house, but by letting it fuel the dreams of others. I didn't find peace in revenge. I found it in purposey. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Prison. Your lives as you know them will be over. I let them picture it: the handcuffs, the trial, the cell. Or, I continued, there is a first option too. Cynthia slid a single thick document across the table followed by a pen. You sign this. It is a legally binding and irrevocable agreement. In it, you will relinquish any and all future claims to my estate or the estate of your mother. You will sign over the deed to your house, the mortgages for which have been paid in full by a holding company, and the title now controlled by the foundation, to the Sir Elijah Callahan Foundation. You will pack a single suitcase each, and you will walk out of this office and out of my life, forever. You will never contact me or anyone associated with me ever again. In return, I finished. I will not press charges. This evidence, I said, gesturing to the pile on the table, will be placed in a secure vault held in escrow by this firm. If you ever violate the terms of this agreement in any way, it will be delivered to the authorities immediately. You will have your ours freedom, but you will have nothing else. You will start over from zero with nothing but the clothes on your backs. I leaned back in my chair. Cynthia and I said nothing more. The choice was theirs. Ruin or prison, erasure or extinction. The pen sat on the table between them waiting. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The choice was between a life in ruins and no life at all. I watched as my son's hand, trembling slightly, reached for the pen. He didn't read the document. He just signed his name on the line Cynthia indicated. His signature, once so confident, was now the barely legible scroll of a defeated man. He pushed the papers over to Brenda. Her tears fell silently onto the page, smudging the ink as she added her own name to the surrender. They stood up, their movements slow and robotic. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. They walked out of the conference room, leaving behind their greed, their ambition, and their entire future. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, and in the silence that followed, I felt not victory, but the profound, quiet sorrow of a necessary end. That was 3 months ago. The seasons have changed. I am not in my large, quiet house. I am standing in a small, bright art gallery downtown. The air smells of fresh paint and possibility. The walls are covered in bold, vibrant canvases, the work of young artists who are seeing their dreams realized for the first time. This is the Ours inaugural exhibition funded by the Elijah Callahan Foundation. A young woman with paint stains on her hands and a fire in her eyes is standing beside me explaining her piece. It's a chaotic, beautiful burst of color that reminds me so much of my wife. I am listening to her, really listening, and I am smiling. It's a genuine smile, one that reaches my eyes. It feels unfamiliar, but welcome. I used to think a legacy was something you passed down, a torch of wealth and assets, handed from one generation to the next. I spent my whole life building something to give to my son. I see now that I was wrong. A true legacy isn't what you leave to your family. It's what you leave in your community. It's the opportunities you create, the good you put out into the world that will continue to grow long after your name is forgotten. By taking away a fortune my son hadn't earned, I gave him the only thing my money could never buy him: the chance to build a life of his own. A life that has to be built on work and character, not on an inheritance. Whether he takes that chance is his choice, not mine. His story is his own now, but more importantly, we took the dark, ugly thing that his greed had created and we transformed it. We turned a son's betrayal into an artist's first exhibition. We turned poison into paint. We turned a potential inheritance into an actual opportunity for hundreds of people I will never meet. In doing so, I am honoring my wife in a way that selling her collection never could have. I am keeping her spirit alive, not by preserving it in a silent house, but by letting it fuel the dreams of others. I didn't find peace in revenge. I found it in purposey. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.